Just getting my stein of coffee ready, guys. We'll be starting in a few minutes. Chat amongst yourself. Hey everyone, just doing a quick audio check. Can you hear me? Is it all coming through? Let me know in the chat, please. You know what I'm like with my audio. Can hear you, can't hear you. Who do I trust? Det and Reget? Or Cresho? Hello everyone, how are you all going? Welcome to a live stream. I thought we would have a look at the governor's speech tonight. What do you think? You know, I've got your comments coming up here. They're coming up on the side as well, you can see here. And I'll highlight them and have a bit of a chit chat. I've got my stein of coffee. I think it's a bit relaxed tonight. Because some people have said, oh Florian, have you had a look at his speech? I thought it'd be good to have a look at the speech tonight and then probably do a longer live stream. Heise's in his PJs. Oh, maybe. I don't know. I may just go straight to bed in this. It's nice and warm at the moment. D-Boy just finished a shift at a nickel mine in WA. Apparently the economic recovery of WA. Well, you're all going to succeed, aren't you? You're going to leave the rest of us East Coasters behind. Just build a wall and keep us out. Except, so what's actually, has anyone been following this Palmer thing? Is he wanting to sue the Western Australian? I've not been following it at all. I really should look into it. Wants to sue the Western Australian government because he couldn't potentially sell a mine to China. Mario has no life, so let's do it. Who has a life now, mate? The world's going to an end. You know? I'm a middle-aged dad. So it's been blocked by emergency legislation. We'll have to have a look into it. So let's see if I've got this right. Okay, I'll turn that off. I've got no life. Poor Mario. He's got no life. Oh well. That's what I said. First job I went for. Surface Paradise Woolworths. Why do you want a job? And I said, because I have no life. I need money to get one. That was how I got my first job. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Oh, thanks for the super chat, mate. The more I've gotten into macroeconomics and how our monetary system works, the less I can watch the news or any TV whatsoever. Look forward to this. I don't know, I've heard bad things about it, mate. People are saying, have you seen this? Wait, I'm going to try and fix this bloody... See how there's that little super chat thing that comes before the text? Hang on, let me try and position. This. Come on, what am I doing? I'll sort it out later. It's fine. Thank you very much, mate. I appreciate the support. What's up, Patrick Stewart? Yeah, that's pretty much right. Pretty much right. I don't have the accent. He's gotten very woke, though. Now, have any of you watched that new Star Trek? The new Star Trek knockoff? I couldn't watch it. I only watched the people making fun of it. Sup, homie? Welcome. So right now I'm streaming to both YouTube and Twitch. So I'm trying to get a bit more happening in Twitch. So we will... Oh, no, before I jump into it, Star Trek Picard lost half of the audience. I was just watching, what's his name? Computing Forever. He has a whole series where he does another channel where he just pulls them apart. I actually watched a really interesting lecture he's got on right now that he's just put out, a presentation from a doctor. And one thing I shared on my Facebook, which I'll bring it up because it shocked me. It really shocked me. The day they declared this a global pandemic. What do you think was the illness for the deaths that day? What do you think was the one above it? Take a guess. Let's see if Facebook has... Take a guess, because I don't think you'll believe it. Yellow fever. I couldn't believe it. Was yellow fever even a thing anymore? I mean, I just... my parents had Gone with the Wind as a kid. That's where I heard about it. So, interesting. Learn new things every day. We're pretty lucky here in Australia, honestly. You got Ross River fever. Tuberculosis, yeah, it's still a problem. Whooping cough too. It's pretty high. Look at that, 440. What's with the beard? No beard Heise. Well, I've been told that the gold price needed to be adjusted, so every time I shave my beard, gold drops 100. So that was under direction, of the what was it, the patriarchy requirements? Yeah, no, it's it gets painful. It's annoying. We'll see. I'll let it grow back. We'll see how long I can last without the beard. It comes back surprisingly quick. D-boy has yellow fever. Really? Cool. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, shit. Yeah, not that sort, mate. It took me a while. I got there eventually. I'm tired. Yellow fever. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, That's what my mate tells me. He's got a wife from Thailand. He keeps saying how he's got yellow fever. You know, good on him. She takes care of him. Okay, so enough of me making an ass of myself. Let's have a look at the opening speech by the governor, and we'll pause and let me know what you think of what he's putting forward. And let me just make sure this is all working. What do you think of the ties? Huh? What are you talking about, Flying Frog? Oh, mate, I think you can read too much into stuff. You can read too much into this stuff. That's the problem. Yes, Maria, another late night stream, because we know you have to do your course. So, we're pulling out the extra ones. So, let's have a look.
Thank you and good morning, and thank you for organising this hearing by video conference. Our thoughts are very much with the members of this committee that are in Victoria, and we wish you all the best.
How's the noise coming through from our governor? Is it all good or too loud? Let us know in the comments. Yeah, mate, everyone always wears black suits. I wear black suits. It's called fashion. There are a few people, actually, I don't wear the ties anymore. I actually do the pocket squares. Because it's a lot less constraining, a lot hotter, or not as hot, and you can, yeah, it's purposeful. You want to look good, mate. Chicks like it when you dress in a suit, okay? Women like men dressed in suits. That's it. And look at Lowe, he's got money. That's how it is, mate. That's life. So it's all good. Let's get back to it.
As you know, much has changed in the world since we last met in February. We've experienced a global pandemic, the biggest peacetime contraction in the Australian economy in nearly 100 years, and extraordinary monetary and fiscal policy measures. This all means that many of the challenges that we face today were hardly imaginable just 6 months ago. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, economic forecasting is very difficult at a time like this, but the RBA released its regular economic update last Friday in the Statement of Monetary Policy. I'd like to begin this morning by highlighting some of the main points from this update and then turn to the policy response over recent months. As you would know, we do not yet have the GDP data for the June quarter, but it will show the biggest economic contraction in many decades, likely to be around 7%.
He's a doctor of economics. I'm assuming. I wonder what his PhD is. I think I read about it somewhere.
If there's any good news at all to be found here, it's that this decline is not as large as we initially feared. It's also not as large as what we're seeing in many other countries at the moment. Similarly, while the labour market outcomes have been very poor, they've not been as bad as was expected. Hours worked were initially expected to fall by a staggering 20% over the first half of this year. The actual fall has only been around half of this, largely due to Australia's initial success in containing the virus and the earlier than expected easing of some of the restrictions.
Well, hours work have been trending down forever. As we can see here, guys, they spiked up a little bit, but I mean, what do you reckon? Bring this in there.
Looking forward now, there's a high degree of uncertainty about the outlook, and our economic recovery depends upon how successful we are in containing the virus. In our baseline scenario, we're expecting the Australian economy to contract by around 6% this year, and then grow by 5% next year and 4% in 2022.
What do you think about that claim, guys? 6% this year, and then 5% back, and then 4% again. I mean, what's the basis of these predictions? That's the question.
It's certainly possible that we'll do better than this if there's a near-term success in containing the virus or there are medical breakthroughs. But on the other hand, if we were to see further setbacks in containing the virus, the recovery would be delayed even further. Given this uncertain outlook, we need to be prepared for a recovery that's uneven and that's bumpy. The recovery is also likely to be more drawn out than was initially expected, despite the downturn being less severe than expected. And there are a few factors at work here. The most obvious is the outbreak in Victoria. At a personal level, this is very distressing, and on behalf of the RBA, I extend very best wishes to everyone in Victoria. And on the economic front, we expect the outbreak will reduce GDP growth in the September quarter by at least 2 percentage points. This will broadly offset the recovery that's been taking place in most other parts of the country. And as a result, we are now not expecting a lift in economic growth until the December quarter. Another consideration is the growing impact of an extended period of weak aggregate demand. In the initial phase of the pandemic, some firms were able to keep going because they had a pipeline of work to keep them busy. And the construction industry is a good example of this. But with few contracts having been signed over recent months, this pipeline is now being emptied for many firms, and they're having to scale back and cut back jobs. Critical to reversing this is stronger growth in aggregate demand. A third consideration is that people's attitudes to spending are changing because of the pandemic. It's probable that households and businesses will remain more cautious than they were before, and this will affect both consumption and investment. How long this change might last is hard to tell, but we are unlikely to see a quick return to the previous patterns of spending.
What do you think, everyone? I think he's on the money there. I think, there's going to be changes to people's spending. People are, well, I don't know. I'm assuming people are worried. Maybe it's just the news that I'm consuming and what I'm worried about and the fact that I got a family. And then we're reading these articles that I'm sure are paid for pieces, like by the app that teaches you how to divide a bloody bill. That's an innovation for millennials. I find that a bit offensive. You don't need a fucking app to figure that out, do you? I mean, come on. So maybe people, we're hearing about more and more people going out there and buying houses.
Given these considerations, our baseline forecast is that the unemployment rate continues to increase, reaching around 10% later in the year. The unemployment rate would have been substantially higher than this if it were not for the JobKeeper program and other income support programs.
Do you think the JobKeeper program, is that affecting workable hours? How many people are on JobKeeper and only working, maybe 1 or 2 hours a week? If that, remotely? I'm pausing this at perfect moment.
And if we take into account people who are on 0 hours, the true unemployment rate is higher than the published measure.
Which is? Are you going to tell us what that actually is? Come on.
We're expecting the published unemployment rate to decline gradually from its 10% peak, but to still be around 7% in a few years' time.
Years, guys. Years' time of 7% unemployment. Damn.
And as I'll come back to later, addressing this high unemployment rate should be very high on our list of national priorities. In all three scenarios published in our latest update, inflation is likely to be very low. Inflation fell into negative territory in the June quarter for the first time since the early 1960s. While grocery prices and the price of some other items rose, this was more than offset by the decline in oil prices.
But we can't drive anywhere. So when you're driving in Victoria, that 5 kilometres you're allowed to drive, one person to buy your bloody groceries that have gone up 30%, you're saving 13 cents on petrol, maybe. I got a hybrid, guys, so it's going to be less effective. But yeah, that's it. It's the oil price, which is completely beyond our control. Is he going to mention childcare? Multiply everything he says by 3. That's Mario's advice there. Yep.
And government's decisions to make childcare free.
There we go. Free childcare. That's it. But that's not something we're not going to pay for in the future, guys. It's just offsetting spending, isn't it? Free childcare. Free childcare. Okay. Free childcare. Oh, he's reading his written speech. Yeah, he's reading his written speech.
We're expecting inflation to return to positive territory in this quarter, but to average between only 1 and 1.5% over the next few years. Wage growth is also expected to be low, averaging 1.5% over the next 2 years.
Well, we saw that today. If you watched the last video I just did, an article discussing wage growth. Well, they've gotten it. They've gotten wage growth, guys. They finally wanted it. It happened. Just all the poor people lost their jobs. All the people on lower income lost their jobs. Bumps up the average. There you go. That's how it works. It's like bloody who's the evil villain in the Marvel movies? Not the chick Marvel woman who is helping bloody Quartering make a fortune. That other one. The one that snaps his fingers. Yeah, it's like a Thanos solution to low wage growth. Just Thanos away everyone under a certain level. It'll bump the average up.
So it's a pretty sobering outlook. I'd now like to turn to the economic policy response. As the pandemic evolved in the early days of March.
Thanks for the lowy bucks, mate. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Some good old fiat.
It became clear that a very significant monetary and fiscal response would be required. By virtue of my role as Governor of the RBA, I've been able to see firsthand how this support's been put in place. What struck me from the outset was the very strong sense of common mission from our political leaders, our regulators, our banks and the RBA itself. And that common mission was to support the Australian economy through this difficult period. The level of cooperation and coordination was extraordinary, and there was a real Team Australia mindset. In my view, this reflects positively on both Australia's political system and our institutions, and we shouldn't forget that.
I don't know. Wouldn't you like a little bit more debate in our political systems? I know Catman's asking, what am I watching? This is our Reserve Bank Governor's opening address to the, Standing Economic Committee. So there's like, this is the beginning speech, and then there's a few hours of questions. And I figure we'd go through the questions probably tomorrow, because it's getting a bit late, maybe tomorrow night, and just go over the opening speech here today. Unless the coffee powers me on. So I'll bring that up there. So that's what I was talking about.
From the outset, there was a very strong sense that we needed to build a bridge to the other side when the virus is contained. As things have turned out, that bridge has had to be longer and shorter than we might have hoped it would be necessary. Even so, it's been the right strategy.
Oh, well, we got to see if this bridge materializes into existence. Hey, Michael. Evening, mate. Thanks for joining. Oh, boy.
At some point, the virus will be contained, and those foundations that have made Australia such a prosperous country will still be there. We'll be better placed to build on those foundations if we've limited the damage to the fabric of our economy and to our society while we're battling the pandemic.
Good day, Jason. How you going? So, I mean, do we want the same foundation? Do we want a property-fueled economy? That's the question. I still think they're going to throw everything they can at property, guys. I think it's just going to be chucked at it.
In terms of the RBA's own response, that began with a cut in the cash rate at our regular meeting on the 3rd of March. The Reserve Bank Board then held an extraordinary meeting just 2 weeks later, where it decided on a comprehensive package that included a further reduction in the cash rate to 25 basis points, the introduction of a target on the 3-year Australian government bonds of 25 basis points, a term funding facility for the banking system on which funds can be provided for 3 years at 25 basis points,
Why can't every members of the public get access to those 25 basis points? Just cut out the middleman, you know?
Continued use of our open market operations to make sure the financial system had a high level of liquidity, and the modification of the interest rate corridor system with the rate paid on exchange settlement balances set at 10 basis points rather than 0. This package is designed to keep funding costs low right across the country and support the provision of credit, especially to small and medium-sized businesses. To support these businesses, the Term Funding Facility provides banks with an additional $5 of low-cost funding for every extra dollar of credit extended to small and medium-sized businesses.
What small or medium-sized business would be jumping in now? How much of a pipeline of work would you have to have lined up now to be brave enough to take debt on? I mean, the only one I've heard of, and to be honest, I'm not going out there that much looking for it, but was a few I've heard of, but my mate invested, he just paid cash for it, you know, in a new advanced cutting equipment. If you got something you could route concrete. There was a plumber who bought a vacuum to suck up for extraction. But I guess, if you got enough work, but who'd be jumping now? Would now be the time? Gordon's talking about the digital blockchain currency. I'll talk about something like that tomorrow from the Fed. Mask makers. Damon saying. I guess, you can make them from home, can't you? I was thinking of making one for Teespring and then putting the chart of the mortality statistics of each age group.
Many other central banks have announced similar packages, although the Bank of Japan is the only other central bank with a yield target. In their case, they have a target for 10-year yields. In announcing our yield target for 3-year bonds, the bank indicated that we're prepared to buy bonds in the secondary market in whatever quantities were needed to achieve that target. To date, overall bond purchases have totaled around $55 billion, and most of these bonds were bought in March and April. These purchases have had the desired effect. They've lowered yields and they've eased market dislocation, which was apparent at the time. In the past week or so, we've again purchased bonds buying around $6 billion. We've done this following a few weeks in which the yield on 3-year bonds had been trading consistently a little above 25 basis points. The yield is now closer to 25 basis points, and we are committed to maintaining the target. In taking the decision in March to target the 3-year yield, the board considered the possibility of instead undertaking a regular program of bond purchases, say buying a set amount of bonds each week. This is what a number of other central banks have done. We chose the yield target for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's a more direct way of achieving our objective of low funding costs right across the country. A bond purchasing program would have also lowered bond yields, but it would have done this indirectly, and there would have been challenges in calibrating the required size of the purchases. Directly targeting a longer-term risk-free interest rate is also a natural extension of our target for the cash rate, which is the risk-free interest rate at the very start of the yield curve. The second reason is that this target reinforces the forward guidance regarding the cash rate. The board has clearly indicated that it will not increase the cash rate until progress is being made towards full employment, and it's confident that inflation will be sustainably within the 2 to 3% target range.
So, First Last is saying, I don't know what he's talking about. It's bond purchases. They're intervening into the market to push the price of, or the yield of bonds down, and they're fixing the cash rate for the foreseeable future. So they're publicly declaring that the cash rate of 0.25 will be this way for years. They want to try and remove an element of risk from people so they get you buying, get you borrowing, get you investing. Maria, oh, this is good. Just sleep watching this. Lowy will put you to sleep. Oh, boy.
given the outlook I sketched earlier, these conditions are not likely to be met for at least 3 years. So it's hard.
3 years. What was the outlook? You wanted unemployment down about 4%? Wow. 3 years of fixed rates, guys. Quick. You got 3 years to pay it off, boys. 3 years to pay off the mortgage.
Highly likely that the cash rate will be at this level for some years, and having a target for 3-year yields of 25 basis points reinforces this message.
Carefree is asking over on Twitch if negative interest rates are coming to Australia soon. We'll have to see if he mentions it, you know. But did you ever think we'd have cash rates of 0.25%? That seemed impossible at one stage, didn't it? We'll have to see.
So that was our rationale. We have not ruled out a separate bond buying program or other adjustments to the mid-March package, but for the time being, the board's view is that the best course of action is to continue with the current package. The board recognises that in the unique circumstances in which the country currently finds itself, the solutions to the challenges we face lie in areas other than monetary policy.
Yogi Bear's asking when they're going to take 25% of everyone's super. Well, indirectly they probably will, mate. They'll just print so much money that what we have in there will lose its value again. Catman is asking me to grow my beard for gold to go up again. Yeah, no, don't worry. I'll do it, mate. I'll do it. It's already happening. I mean, you know, you got to shave every day. It's a real pain in the ass, and it's expensive. Rolf is saying, debt got us here, so debt will get us out of here. Of course. That's it. That's it. I can quicken the process, Blondie. Yeah, I can. I can. Eating more steak, I reckon.
Said that. The mid-March package is providing material help right now, and it will continue to do so. Interest rates are lower than they've ever been before, and the financial system is flush with liquidity. Also helping is the fact that Australia's financial system is in good shape. We went into the pandemic with strong balance sheets and high levels of capital in the Australian banking system, and this means that our financial institutions are well placed to provide the credit that the economy will need in the recovery phase. One monetary policy option that has been the subject of recent discussion is the possibility of the RBA creating money to directly finance government spending, so-called MMT.
Oh, here we go. This will be interesting. I'll have to slice this bit off for a separate video. What do you think? I'll have a Stein for this one.
For some, this offers the possibility of a free lunch. The harsh reality, though, is there's no free lunch. There's no magic pudding here, and there's no way of putting aside the government's budget constraint permanently. As I spoke about in a talk last month, it's certainly possible for a central bank to use monetary financing to affect when and how government spending is paid for. Depending upon how things are managed, it can be paid for through the inflation tax, by implicit taxes on the banking system, or by higher general taxes in the future. But it does have to be paid for at some point.
At least he's not going to take us down the MMT road. At least he's not going to take us down the MMT road. And Brownie03, yeah, Steiner coffee. Yeah, it's kind of my, you know, half a litre coffee at a time. It's all good. So guys, it could be worse. It could be worse.
I want to make it clear that monetary financing of the budget is not on the agenda in Australia.
Only banksters get free lunch. Yep. We're in the wrong game, guys.
The separation of monetary policy and fiscal financing is part of Australia's strong institutional framework, and it served the country well and will continue to do so. The Australian government and the states and territories have ready access to the capital markets, and they can borrow at historically low rates of interest and that's how they should finance themselves. At a more practical level, I'd like to mention a couple of other areas where the RBA has been providing assistance with Australia's COVID-19 response. The first is that as the transactional banker for the Australian government. Over recent months, the RBA's banking systems have been used to make record numbers of payments, processing the government's income support to households and to businesses. We've done this with around 90% of our staff working from home, and it's been a great effort by the RBA's banking and payments teams. The second is meeting the increased demand for banknotes. While COVID-19 has accelerated the shift to electronic payments, there has, paradoxically, also been record demand for banknotes. It seems this is because people want to hold a few more dollars at home.
I can't say I'm surprised. Brownie's asking if I've got trouble sleeping when I drink coffee this late. No, I not really. No. Jessica, he's a wonderful speaker for sounding boring and monotone on purpose to reduce the attention of the listener. Yes, I can't imagine you'd have to be as... I mean, he's a civil servant, a bureaucrat, you know.
The result has been that the stock of banknotes on issue has increased from $83 billion in February to $94 billion today.
So let's not go through with the cash ban.
That's a large increase in a short period of time. We've met this extra demand despite our main storage vault being located in one of the coronavirus hotspots in Melbourne. I'd like to close now with some general comments about the economic policy response to the pandemic. While monetary policy has played an important role, it's been fiscal policy that's provided much of the support to the Australian economy. This is quite a change from how things have worked over recent decades, and it's being accompanied by a significant increase in public borrowing as governments work to limit the hit to people's incomes. This shift in fiscal policy is quite a shock for a country that's got used to low budget deficits and low levels of public debt. In that context, it's worth making a few points. The first is that by borrowing today to support the economy, we are avoiding an even bigger loss of output and jobs that would damage our economy and our society for years to come, and this would also put ongoing strain on the budget. Second, Australia's public finances are in strong shape, and public debt here is much lower than in most other countries. Third, the overall national balance sheet is also in a strong position after decades of good economic performance. And fourth, government's financing costs have never been lower, with interest rates being the lowest since Federation.
Who cares? Look at what the government's pissing the money away on. That's the problem as well. I mean, Queensland, they're borrowing money to pay for essential services. You know, doesn't seem like a smart way to do it, does it?
This all means that the expected increase in public debt is entirely manageable and it's affordable. It's the right thing to do to borrow today, to help people, to keep them in jobs, and to boost public investment at a time when private investment is very weak. Of course,
I wonder why private investment is so weak. I wonder why. Queensland, the smart state. Yeah, don't go there, mate. Don't go there, mate. You know.
There'll always be debates about the precise nature of the programs and about how much support should be provided. But the general direction, the general strategy that we have right now is the right one. Looking forward, an important priority will be to boost jobs. Based on the forecast I discussed earlier, high unemployment is likely to be with us for some time. I think it should be a concern for us all. The Reserve Bank will do what it can with its policy instruments to support the journey back to full employment. Beyond that, government policies that support people's incomes, that add to aggregate demand through direct government spending, and that make it easier for firms to hire people, all have important roles to play. As I've said on a number of times before, we need to make sure that Australia is a great place for businesses to expand, to invest, to innovate, and to hire people. Thank you very much. My colleagues and I are here to answer your questions.
Okay, so that was the Governor's opening address to the House Standing Committee on Economics. Now, it goes on with a whole series of different presentation or questions. Do you want to keep going, guys? Do you want to keep going, or would you rather finish up for tonight and have a look at that tomorrow? What do you think? Let me know in the comments, everyone, because we've been going 45 minutes. Why am I getting a CPU overload? Why am I getting a CPU overload? Why am I getting that? Okay, I was resizing stuff. So let me know in the comments, yes, if you want me to go on. You are tired, aren't you, Heise? Yeah, I am, but, it's only 10 o'clock. It's the weekend. It's the weekend. I got a big project finished a couple of days ago, so I'll just go hard a bit longer, You may just get tomorrow's videos a bit later if I sleep in. I normally get up at like 5:30 to do my videos in the morning, and then if something comes up, I'll chuck another one out in the middle of the day. Yeah, well, it is a public holiday. I hate public holidays. I really hate them because it always used to be I just have to pay money to staff to not work. Rachel's going to bed. Okay, honey. Okay, you can watch it in bed. It's fine. You know. So yeah. Have a bong. No, that won't keep me going, Cat Man. That'll put me to sleep faster than anything. I don't know who the hell thinks that keeps people going. I need coffee. Okay, let's keep going. I'm actually trying to... Rachel looks like she will be starting her own channel. So her content will be moving off HeiseSays and will be starting another one because she's just done quite a long... a whole lot of recording about meat. About meat. Okay. So let's get this over here and...
It's adaptable, and over time they increase housing prices.
No, I need to, because I haven't edited this. Hang on, I got to find the end of his last speech.
Sustainable position. So there are a whole range of options, and banks are the main averaging 1.5%.
I chop this up. What am I doing here?
Strong sense that we needed to build a bridge to the other side when the virus industry and in response. The first is that as the transactional banker for the Australian.
Okay, hang on. Wait. A
number of times before, we need to make sure that Australia is a great place for business.
Hang on, did I get a super chat from someone? I did, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to find the video here. If I did, I'm not being rude. I'm trying to get this sorted out. Okay, thanks, mate. And I think you just hit 1,000, didn't you? Congratulations on the growth of your channel, man. Good work.
Businesses to expand, to invest, to innovate, and to hire people. Thank you very much. My colleagues and I are here to answer your questions.
Okay, here we go. We got it. Okay. You ready, guys? We'll keep going. Okay. This is the exciting bit.
Thank you very much, Governor, for that opening remarks and for appearing with the Deputy Governors today. You've said a number of things in your opening statement, which I just want to briefly explore. You said that you don't see the solutions around economic recovery being realised through monetary policy. So is that a correct reflection of your remarks?
Well, monetary policy is playing a supporting role. The fact that interest rates are as low as they've ever been before is helpful. The bank system's flushed with liquidity. That's helpful, and the banking system's in a strong position. So that's all helping. But looking forward, there's limits to what more we can do. And I think the main policy instrument we really have now is fiscal policy. It's supporting people's incomes, adding to aggregate demand through government spending and structural forms that make it attractive for people to hire, businesses to hire people. That's what we've got to focus on now.
I'm not disagreeing with your assessment, but it sounds to me like you're saying monetary policy is exhausted.
We've got monetary policies exhausted. Well, conventional monetary policy is exhausted. We're at 0.25% cash rate. What if you go to zero, it's going to make no difference. And negative is unconventional. That's the exciting new world. The exciting new world that New Zealand is getting people to prepare for.
In terms of what can be done in terms of promoting economic recovery.
I wouldn't say it's exhausted. I think there are limits to what more it can reasonably do. I mean, we could make some adjustments to the package we introduced in March. I don't think at the moment we would get any traction from making adjustments. But the main going forward is going to be fiscal and structural policy. That's the reality we face.
Shazro, we can't pay it back. Rachel keeps telling me she thinks they're going to inflate it away. Or they'll put more consumption taxes on, up GST. I tend to agree with her there.
So you then said before, just at the end of your remarks, that you see the solution as being promoting an environment which enables business to expand, invest, and innovate. Do you want to outline for us where you see
we may be able to catch up to New Zealand with regards to economic complexity, guys? What do you reckon? Go Aussie, 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 Aussie.
possible or important reforms that can enable industry and businesses and enterprise to do so?
I don't have a kind of a shopping list of things that I would like to do, but I have a shopping list of general areas. One is the industrial relations system. I think there's a process going on at the moment to try and make the enterprise bargaining system more flexible so we can get back to a world where businesses and employees can get together and make their businesses work effectively rather than be weighed down by process, which is what happens at the moment. So industrial relations is one. I think the general approach we have to innovation, the financing of research and development is an area to look at. Another area is the general approach to regulation. I mean, there are many examples at the moment where projects take a long time to be approved. That slows down the dynamism of the economy.
These are all very good points he's raising here. These are all very good points. Industrial relations, well, just approval processes, research and development here in Australia.
Planning and zoning restrictions, I think another area where...
But see, these are all interventions into the market by the state. This is where I'd argue for experimenting with some regions around the country, perhaps some special economic regions or zones, where we experiment with different scaling back of these interventions. It's never going to happen. I don't think there's a political will to even consider it. They'll just tinker with shit and expand and innovate with what? Yeah, I don't know. New efficient ways to suck more tax out of people. That'd probably be innovative.
Where we could do things to make the economy more dynamic.
Ludicrous Locks is saying it should have been addressed years ago. Yeah, but then they couldn't do it now, could they? Everyone's talking up gold. What's it sitting at now?
And over time, making sure that we have a workforce that has the right skills and that's adaptable. So it's human capital, physical capital, skills, regulation, and the labour market. They're the areas that we should be focusing on.
but these things, frankly, should just be looked at in general, shouldn't they?
And tax?
Tax, yep. The one that I've talked about on previous occasions is stamp duty. That's a tax on mobility, people moving location. So if we're looking for an economy that's kind of dynamic and vibrant, we want to remove taxes on mobility. And many people who look at the structure of the Australian tax system say the balance between taxes on land, income, wealth generation and consumption isn't optimal.
How do you all go with your taxes this year, guys? Was it painful to do? It's so convoluted and bloody complicated. I tell you, it really is. It really is.
So this is an issue that's been debated in Australia for a long period of time. There are many political issues here, but I think we know the general areas we should be looking at. The challenge is to actually implement some of those ideas in difficult times.
The reflection I make.
We should be looking at those in good times. We should be looking at those to usher in a golden age of freedom and enterprise here in Australia. But I mean, what do you reckon? You think there'll be a revival, shall we say, in political activism here in Australia, or just political interest? Yeah, what do you reckon?
Governor, is that you don't say that's necessarily your job to do that. That's up to the government and the parliament to decide, which I do respect and understand. But getting those on the record is very important around freeing up the economy. You may...
why is he smiling when he's saying all these things? Because it's not really... Well, it's not his position, as he's saying. It's not his position. I mean, there's some good advice there, and I think a lot of people would agree with what he's saying there. But there's can you imagine just the fighting across the parliamentary house? Playtime 1970 thinks political apathy is alive and well. In Australia, yeah, you're probably right, mate. Brett's going, he even smiles when he's talking shit. I mean, it's, the bureaucrats, mate. Bureaucrats.
Very specific comments about debt and the opportunity for borrowing and the importance of fiscal measures to carry us through this period. I want to ask, do you think the states should be doing more when you've got the Commonwealth currently spending about $314 billion and the states only contributing about $44.8 billion so far in spending to assist? Would an increase or a shift in responsibility to the states help aid the economic recovery?
Gold, he's actually on $1 million, mate, not 450. He's on $1 million. I'm not kidding.
Well, I think we need both the federal government and state governments carrying their fair share. The federal government, I understand, has announced measures so far equivalent to roughly 7% of GDP. It's been very important in getting the country through this, and we're going to see budget deficit next year, probably close to 10% of GDP. So there's been very significant fiscal stimulus from the federal government. The measures to date from the state government add up to almost close to 2% of GDP. So in aggregate, those measures are smaller. They've largely focused on supporting businesses through the difficult period, extra spending on health, and in some states there's been extra spending on infrastructure and on housing and skills development. In going forward, the challenge we face is to create jobs. And the state governments do control many of the levers here. They control many of the infrastructure programs. They do much of the health and education spending. They're responsible for much of the maintenance of much of Australia's infrastructure. So I would hope over time we would see more efforts to increase public investment in Australia to create jobs. And the state governments have a really critical role to play there. To date, I think many of the state governments have been concerned about having extra measures because they want to preserve the low levels of debt and their credit ratings. I understand why they do that, but I think preserving the credit ratings is not particularly important. What's important is that we use the public balance sheet in a time of crisis to create jobs for people, which is, from my perspective, creating jobs for people is much more important than preserving the credit ratings. I have no concerns at all about...
What's the point in creating jobs for people in Victoria right now, when you only have one person on a site?
The state governments being able to borrow more money at low interest rates. The Reserve Bank is making sure that's the case. The priority for us is to create jobs, and the state governments have an important role there. And I think over time they can do more.
Is anyone noticing works coming from the States? Here in Queensland, it's like the DETA haven't been pushing out many projects. There hasn't been any more activity than beforehand. And we're about to hit an election here in Queensland too. Northern Territory, they're having an election coming soon too, so it'll all be frozen. We'll have to see what happens, you know. Red tape only, yeah.
But the federal government over time may be having more as well. So we may need all shoulders to the wheel.
Well, it'll be an interesting balancing exercise, but there's clearly currently an imbalance between the contribution of the Commonwealth to the states in terms of the economic recovery, or the sustaining the situation and leading towards economic recovery on those simple numbers, and you've outlined that they control many of the levers. How do you see the economic impact of the border closures at the moment?
Well, I think there are two sides to this coin, aren't there? The border closures clearly have an effect on economic activity right at the moment. I know kind of in the agricultural industry it's creating problems because workers moving between states are often important for dealing with crops, and so that's creating an issue. And at the Reserve Bank itself, we've had issues with some of our projects where we've required people in Queensland to come down and provide services, and they can't come down, so things get put on hold. So it's clearly having a significant impact on economic activity. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is in those states where the border restrictions are in place, the coronavirus numbers have come right down, in some cases to zero, and that's creating a sense of confidence in those states and increases spending there. And if closing the borders does help contain the virus, then in the end we'll benefit from that. So short-term cost, perhaps there are some short-term benefits as well because it's generating greater levels of confidence. I think we see in Western Australia now and Tasmania to some extent as well, kind of people feeling a bit better and spending's picking up.
Wolfman, that -3% is because of the free childcare everyone got. Food's going up, but you know, some people got free childcare, so there you go. That's why. It's kind of bullshit.
That's partly because of the border closures. So that's the positive short-term gain.
Rachel is saying, or Rach G is saying, you know, it's not the government's responsibility to create jobs, but it's their responsibility to create conditions for business that leads to more jobs. You'd hope so, wouldn't you? You'd hope so. Because remember that, you know, the way government gets money is from other people.
And perhaps the longer-term gain is we're more successful in containing the virus nationally. I don't know what the medical advice there is, but it's certainly possible. So, you know, there are two sides to this.
I don't dispute there are two sides, but do you think that, how long do you believe that there will be how much economic impact do you think it will be to have ongoing state border closures if they were to, say, continue for the remainder of 2020? And do you think there's a point at which it can become imbalanced against the economic recovery of the nation?
Well, it certainly could be. There could be a point where
Haven't they done the modelling? Has there actually been any economic modelling of the impact of these interventions to mitigate the disease? Let me know if it's actually been done anywhere in the world. Be interesting to see. But you know, then you're one of those you know, granny killers, aren't you?
The benefits that we get on the health front aren't sufficiently large to offset the short-term economic costs. That's certainly conceptually possible. The reality, though, we face is that the economy is not going to recover until we get on top of the virus. We'll have these periodic shutdowns. People are very nervous, so people aren't going to spend, even if there aren't restrictions in place, people are not going to spend if they're nervous about the virus. So I'm not privy to the medical advice about how effective the border restrictions are in slowing the spread of the virus.
Surely you would, looking at the example...
I'm more worried about the economy, to be honest. I guess that's just me. I'm not a Karen running around with my phone recording people. Well, yeah, I am for a YouTube, but that's different. That's completely different.
Of New Zealand, where they effectively achieved elimination, had a very strong border.
No, they didn't. They still had people infected and they got out, didn't they? So they didn't achieve elimination.
Closures, and they're obviously substantially two core islands, and ultimately, if you keep your borders closed, it still doesn't even address it. So do you see any risk management and living with the challenges of the virus as a more sustainable alternative rather than the hopes that you can either eliminate it and or have hard border closures as an alternative?
That's a good question. That is a very good question. Thanks, Royce. Appreciate the super chat, mate. I like Heise's cheeky grin. Thanks, mate. So, this is a good question here from Tim.
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, I think New South Wales is proving to be a really important test case, because if New South Wales, we can manage some limited community transmission with first-rate testing, with contact tracing and isolation when cases arise, if that can work, then we should be able to open up the economy. I think it should give us confidence that we can keep on top of it. And if we can develop that confidence, I would hope, from an economic perspective, that we could open our borders, and that as a country we have enough ability and confidence in our capability to keep the virus under control when it pops up. If New South Wales can't make this a success, then I think we're going to face a whole lot more challenges. So what's going on in New South Wales is still very important, and we've got a lot resting on that being successful. This demonstration effect that you can open up, give people some freedom, have economic activity return to a type of normality, and keep the virus under control and open the borders. Let's hope New South Wales can make it work.
Let's hope they can indeed. Can I ask one of the most important actions, and I agree with you around the RBA's facilities to help particularly the retail banks in supporting loan deferrals for SMEs and, of course, household mortgages has been critical. But where do you see the trajectory around the growth in credit and the issues around loan deferrals? There's been an extension from the original September deadline for another 4 months in certain circumstances where banks or retail banks were prepared. How sustainable do you see that, and do you see the possibility of further deferral options?
Well, I think it's too early to be talking about further deferrals at this stage. Around 10% of mortgage customers deferred. That's a significant number, but
10%, guys.
It's not the majority. It's 10%, and of that 10%, roughly a fifth have already started repaying their mortgages again on the regular schedule. So that's positive, and the banks tell us that there are other customers who deferred who would be in a position to start their mortgage payments again, but they're just choosing not to because they want to build up cash reserves. Or
people are building up an emergency fund, which is good, which is a good thing to do, you know. There are significant numbers of people who can't start paying their mortgages again, but we're not talking about the majority of bank customers. Recently, I've spoken to the CEOs of most of the banks and the credit unions. I know they're all paying very close attention to this issue, as is the ABA.
there's a very broad agreement that it's in no one's interest to have widespread loan defaults and forced sales. It's not in the bank's interests. It's not in their customers' interest.
Isn't collusion like that between organisations illegal?
And it's not in the country's interest. So the banks are working with their customers on how they can service the loans. There are a few options here. In some cases, principal and interest loans can be turned to interest-only loans, and that reduces the repayment burden. Many households have built up...
Wait, what was that? I just missed that. I was reading your comments. Was that interest-only loans, guys? What do you think? You think we'll start to see people pushed to interest-only loans?
Substantial buffers over time in their offset accounts or in other deposit accounts, and they can use that to pay down their loans. In some cases, there's a possibility to lengthen the term of the loan to reduce the rate of repayment. In some cases, if it's an investment property, if someone has 2 or 3 investment properties, they can sell those investment properties.
That's forced sales.
To put their balance sheet back into a more sustainable position. So there are a whole range of options, and banks are working with all their customers to work out which is the best option. There will be, no doubt, some borrowers who can't pay back their loans and they'll have to sell the property. The banks are very conscious to make sure that doesn't occur in a rush, that process is managed and smooth. So whether there needs to be further deferrals, I think time will tell, but at the moment, the banking industry's got this issue right at the top of mind.
Further deferrals, guys. So come on, put your bets now. Let us know in the comments. December next year, you reckon? Are we doing a video in March? Well, we're deferring. They're deferring again until December 2045, guys. Buy now, make no payments. Just rent it off the bank.
They've hired a lot more people, and they're working with their customers to make sure that this is all manageable. The last point I'll make here is that the solution isn't more loan deferrals, it's more jobs. The solution to most of the problems we face is kind of creating jobs, and that's back to where we were before. It's aggregate demand, an environment that's conducive to hire people and income support. So
all the things that the governor's mentioned, which I would argue is pushing or arguing for the government to step back, could help create more jobs. Do you think our Labour and Liberal leaders would see it like that? Do you think they'd see it like that?
That's the solution. If you're worried about loan deferrals, then it comes back to creating jobs.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, the first place where people are likely to default on their mortgages because they don't have employment anymore. But do you have any concerns at the volume of debt that's now being accrued as a consequence, or you have a high degree of confidence that the banks are sufficiently on top of it and have the necessary capital to address any and the flexibility to address any problems?
Yeah, I don't have any concerns about the stability of the banking system at all. The banks went into this episode with the highest level of capital they've ever had. The capital buffers are strong. The banks are in a robust position. They've started making provisioning for extra loan defaults. I think that will be sufficient, and they're in a strong position to provide the credit the country needs. The issue more is kind of the stress that this is going to cause for individual households. As their incomes come down, they've got debt and they can't pay it back.
Scott's got it. He's got the solution. He's got the solution. New home loans with 10-year deferral from the commencement. I can see the ads on the TV now. Switch to ANZ. We'll give you a 15-year deferral on your repayments.
So that's a very stressful situation, and the banks understand that, and they're working through the mechanisms I've just talked about it with their customers. So, but I don't have any concerns at all about the stability of the banking system.
So you said before, and rightly, that employment and job creation is critical part of the discussion around economic recovery and addressing issues of aggregate demand. The RBA has previously flagged with this committee that it was doing research into the compulsory super guarantee and its viability, and it's done its own research showing the pass-through as deferral of wages. Do you have a view that it's a good idea or a bad idea to defer the increase in the compulsory super guarantee at this time?
I'm not going to offer an opinion on whether it's a good or bad idea. All I would note is it's in legislation. I'm not aware of a proposal by any political party to change that legislation. So I'm not going to offer an opinion on whether there should be. I think the evidence is that...
Can tell he's been a bureaucrat his whole life, can't you?
Increases of this form do get offset by lower wage growth over time. And we haven't done any work since the last hearing to contradict that conclusion. So...
But do you think that if we increase the compulsory super guarantee, will it have a negative effect on employment and growth in employment in the economy?
I don't know whether it have a negative effect on employment. It will certainly have a negative effect on wages growth. If this increase goes ahead, I would expect wage growth to be even lower than it otherwise would be. So there'll be an offset in terms of current income. Some people say that's perfectly fine, and other because people will have higher future income. So there's a trade-off here. Do we want people to have the income now, or do we want to have them have it later on?
Even less money that people have personal control over. Yay.
So different people will view that trade-off quite differently, and I don't want to enter into that debate because it's potentially politically controversial. Although at the moment, both parties support the legislation. That's my understanding. Is that right?
That's why we need more people in the House of Reps, guys. That's why more people need to learn how to use preferences. So we just don't have, two versions in the bloody House of Reps that are so similar it makes hardly any difference.
Remains the case.
It's not illogical to say that if you increase the compulsory super guarantee, it's likely to have a negative effect on jobs growth.
Do any of those people look like they've run businesses? Hang on, let's look up Tim Wilson MP. MP. Let's look him up. Australian politician who serves as federal member for Goldstein. House of Reps, elected in 2016. Early life, yada yada yada. Human Rights Commissioner, okay. I want to see what you did for a business. Institute of Public Affairs for 7 years. Yeah, but have you actually run any businesses before that, mate? Ah, well. Cool.
Will it have a negative? There will be less current income. And if there's less income, there may be less spending. And if there's less spending, there may be less jobs. But that's kind of a whole sequence of chains that have to kind of work out. But it's certainly possible.
Isn't that... He ran a couple into the ground? Okay. Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point of having economists? To predict these things, to model this stuff out, to put an answer on the table to our politicians?
And as has always been the case for superannuation, it's a trade-off between current income and future income. And reasonable people come down on different sides of that.
Can I touch on just before I hand over the Deputy Chair in about 5 minutes? The Productivity Commission recently did a report looking at employment amongst young Australians. Are you familiar with that report?
I'm familiar there was a report, but I haven't read it.
Oh, okay. It showed there was negative. There was not income growth amongst young.
No, playtime. We don't want first across the line. No chance, mate. Preferences are actually really useful if people know how to use them. You kind of want debate and argument in Parliament. You want a mix of views. You know? You don't want all the same opinions. You don't want no one to listen to the speeches about the cash ban. You kind of want them to actually reach a compromise, not just push shit through. Because then when the other side gets through, it's going to be the same rubbish. People just think they waste preferences. They don't understand how it works. It's probably one of the best inventions Australia's ever given the world.
Australians under the age of 35. But do you have any reflection over since the early 2000s in the context of a competitive labour market? Do you have any reflections on that? Or?
Well, as I said, I haven't read the report, but we have talked at this committee before about the lack of wages growth, low wages growth over a long period of time, and that's been particularly pronounced for younger workers. And that's made their position more difficult. That's clearly the situation we've been in. When we've talked about this issue before, there are a number of factors. One is the very big increase in labour supply. There's been a strong increase in labour demand, but there's been a big increase in labour supply, so that had put downward pressure on wages. I think the nature of technology and has had an effect as well. So there's been a lack of wages growth across the entire community, and young people are no exception, and in fact their wage growth has been even weaker on average. So it's a problem that I've been calling out for at least 2 or 3 years. That problem is going to be even more acute over the next couple of years.
Rolf is going so they'll be able to afford a caravan in a trailer park. Actually, mate, it's known as a tiny house now. A tiny house? You've got to be right.
But it's been, in my view, it's been overtaken by a bigger problem, and that is getting people to have jobs. Let's get them to have jobs, and then we can worry about the wages. But the first priority at the moment is to make sure people over the next couple of years have jobs. Because if they don't have jobs, that hurts the economy, it hurts the society, and creates all sorts of problems.
Yeah, no, he's 100% right there. This is going to be if you get a generation that are just detached from the workforce, that see no hope of coming back in, what the hell is that going to... we'll wind up like Spain with really high youth unemployment.
So the priority now is to make sure people have jobs, and I think that should be our singular focus.
But there's different arguments on how to create jobs. You've got interventionists and calling for more government spending, government lever pulling. You've got other people saying pull government back. Is there anyone at a public level calling for that? I'm sure there are.
So when it comes to the environment of job creation, and particularly for small and medium businesses to be able to employ people with a degree of confidence, there's currently insolvency provisions to assist small and medium businesses, particularly in this disruptive time. Do you think that they should be extended?
I think there's a case wherever in this unique position of parts of the country being shut down because of a once-in-a-century pandemic. I think there are strong arguments that normal shouldn't apply. If that means an extension of these provisions, I think that would be sensible. At some point, though, we'll have to confront the reality that there are firms in Australia that are no longer viable because of the pandemic, and they will need to be wound up. We're going to be better off if that's a managed process that takes time, that takes place over time, rather than occurs just kind of because we go over a cliff because of some change in regulation. So there will be insolvencies, there'll be bankruptcies, businesses, there'll be some businesses that will not recover. That's the harsh reality of an economic downturn that's the worst in 100 years. We're going to be better off if that process is staggered and managed rather than occurring quickly in a short period of time. And I would hope kind of extension of these provisions would allow that process to be more managed.
One of the areas to promote job growth is in the context of construction, which is very important for economies, particularly in places like Victoria and New South Wales. The RBA recently published a report called The Apartment Shortage, which went...
The apartment shortage, eh? I have to look at that one.
Through the practical costs of apartment dwellings, particularly looking, if I'm not mistaken, in New South Wales, and that essentially the final price, only 68% reflected the cost of actually constructing the property. The remaining difference, 32%, or nearly a third, essentially directly a result of regulatory costs, particularly around planning and zoning.
100%. You know, this is... I'll have to go through this one. I haven't gone through this. Just showing how much of a government burden there is on bloody building these things. Hey, mate. Ryan, thank you very much for the super chat, mate. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
I'm just wondering, do you see...
See, here we go. The same argument I'm making before. Stimulating the economy by pulling back, getting the government to step back. You know? Flatten the economy. Oh, shit, we need to put that on a mask. Flatten the economy.
Deregulation around zoning and planning as a critical part of stimulating construction, which will both have the effect of lowering house prices but also promoting job creation.
My short answer to that is yes, but if I could ask Lucy to respond to that in more detail, because she's much closer to the research than I am. That's okay?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so the first point, thanks, Phil. The first point I'd make is that we have a long tradition at the Reserve Bank of releasing research discussion papers to stimulate discussion. They're not necessarily the views of the bank. They are staff work that is intended to stimulate broader discussion. That's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is that that paper is not intended to be the whole answer in working out what to do. It wasn't advocating any particular policy stance. It identified that in Sydney there was a gap between price and marginal cost in the apartment market, much as one of the same authors had with a different co-author found for the detached housing market in an earlier paper. Interestingly, you don't find that same gap in Brisbane. So, you know, how it's just a matter of understanding what it is about the different markets that is causing that gap. Quantitatively, the change in housing prices that even doubling the apartment supply would create is, you know, not a magic bullet. It's not going to halve the cost of housing, and
it'll halve it by take a third of it, won't it? And Lucy is one of the assistant governors. These are all the other people presenting here to the standing committee.
So, you know, the contribution of that paper was to quantify what the cost of those, what we think is probably the zoning regulation. There could be other things going on, but it's given the pattern across cities, it seems it's most likely to be zoning. Quantifies the cost in terms of higher prices that people are ending up paying. What it doesn't do is quantify the benefits that people are seeking to obtain by having zoning regulations and, you know, mediating the scarcity of land supply. And, you know, in that I would, you know, remind everyone that relative to Brisbane and Melbourne, Sydney is more constrained by geographic features. And so you can understand that the political system and the social fabric may want to mediate how that supply of land is allocated.
And increased construction costs mean increased sales costs, which means increased stamp duty revenue for the government. It's all a nice little package, isn't it?
And then the question is that being done in the right way?
So just quickly, finally, for the Governor then, before I hand over to the Deputy Chair, do you think in terms of post-COVID economic recovery, there's a role for the Commonwealth and the states to work together to address the issues around planning and regulation, which is increasing housing supply and potentially suppressing the number of jobs in construction?
I think that those issues should be addressed. Whether it's the federal government, the state governments coming together to do it, I'm not sure enough about the political economy of how all that works. But all the research that we and others have done says that the zoning restrictions and the planning restrictions make housing supply less adaptable, and over time they increase housing prices.
Yeah, well, that's intervention. Very simple there. Yeah.
So if we can do something about that, that would be good. The other thing that's increased housing prices over time is inadequate investment in public and private transport. because as this paper identifies, the main cost of housing for in many parts of the country is the price of the land. And the land prices are high because there's strong demand for well-located land relative to the supply. That pushes up the price. And we can increase the supply of well-located land through good investment in transport. So the best housing policies, the best way of making housing affordable for people, I think, is transport policy and zoning and planning rules. The tendency always is to give people money to try and make housing more affordable. That affects the demand side, and I understand.
He's right on the money here. It's good to see people are talking about this at a senior level.
Why? That's the response. But the best response is on the supply side, and it's transport, zoning and planning.
See, in architecture, I don't even know if our professional body would be advocating for anything like this. They're so bloody PC and soft. So no, he's got some good points here.
Whether state governments working together, I'm not sure, but what I'm sure of is that the issue needs to get, and it would make a difference to our housing prices in a way that made housing more affordable for people.
All right, thank you, Governor. Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Governor, thanks to you and your colleagues for joining us today. As we discussed in the last hearing, throughout your time as inflation has been below the target band, unemployment has been above the natural rate. Now you've put out forecasts which have core inflation remaining below the target band for the entire forecast horizon, meaning that you could conceivably go from your appointment in 2016 to the end of your second term in 2023, basically without once bringing inflation within the target band, your central mandate. It's pretty clear that other central banks are doing more, given where Australia's exchange rate is at. We've had a quarter of negative inflation. And I want to ask you in that context about your decision to rule out negative interest rates. That's been criticised by a number of commentators, Stephen Kirshner, Bill Evans. You've got the experience of other central banks around the world. There was a BIS survey, which you would know well since you wrote the foreword, which found that other central banks that had taken rates negative thought the policy helped it achieve their goals and that the side effects were contained.
Because Japan is doing so well, isn't it, guys?
So my opening question to you, Governor, is wouldn't a year of negative rates be better than a decade of zero rates?
Interesting. A year of negative rates better than a decade of zero rates. Can they ever dig themselves out of it, though? What'll happen? What happened when America tried to up the rates, when the Fed tried to normalise rates, which is pretty much mentioned in every episode of Peter Schiff's show?
I don't quite see the trade-off quite like that. I make it clear, I haven't ruled out negative interest rates.
What? Did I hear that right? Did he just say I haven't ruled out negative interest rates?
What I've said is that they're extraordinarily unlikely.
There you go. So, it's going to happen. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. That means he will do it, Michael's saying. What do you think, guys? Do you think that means he'll do it? Who do you think will hit it first? Australia or New Zealand? Australia or New Zealand? Extraordinarily unlikely. Maybe we should put that on a mask. Negative interest rates, extraordinarily unlikely. You know? Oh, I know we have real negative interest rates, Mr. Nice Guy 81. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. We have. NZ first, everyone reckons? Come on, we need to lobby to get NZ, New Zealand, to become a state of Australia, so it ups our economic complexity, guys. You know, that needs to happen. Oh, Jubilee will never happen. They want to keep their serfs working, guys. Why would you get rid of that?
You know, in a world where it's...
He's persuading us. Yes, Ian's right. He's persuading us.
So uncertain and so fluid, I don't think it's prudent to rule it out, but it's
You never say never. He's been watching James Bond.
extraordinarily unlikely. And if I can explain why, that's the conclusion we've reached. On the positive side of the ledger, I think the main benefit from negative rates is downward pressure on the exchange rate. If we were to have lower rates, then I think we'd see a lower currency.
Thanks for the super chat, Tom. I appreciate it, mate.
As well. So that's the benefit, and that would be a material benefit. We've got to weigh that against the costs, and there are two here that I'd reference. The first is that negative interest rates in most countries do impair the profitability and efficiency of the financial system, and ultimately its ability to provide credit to the real economy, which is really important. We're seeing this in Europe now. There are a lot of problems in the European banking system, but they're structurally low profits, and it's quite difficult for them to provide the credit to the economy that's needed. So the banking systems don't work as well with negative interest rates. They would also create distortions in our financial system because
isn't his entire premise of Keynesian economics about implementing distortions into the financial system? Isn't that the whole point of having a reserve bank?
deposit rates would effectively be bounded at zero. That's what happens in other countries as well for most depositors. So a bank...
Oh no, you won't get your 0.55% interest rate that you're getting now on your deposit. That's not even going to meet the bloody... the bloody fees that they charge you. Let alone if you actually want to talk to a human and walk up to a teller. Then, oh boy, then they'll sting you with a fee. Human interaction, you got to pay extra for that shit, guys.
That financed itself with a lot of deposits would be a competitive disadvantage to one that finances itself in wholesale markets at negative interest rates. So there'd be distortions within the financial system as well there.
Oh yeah, there'd be disincentives to take deposits. Shit.
So credit supply, I don't think, would be enhanced by negative interest rates. The second negative I just want to mention is that in many countries, there's increased concern that negative interest rates encourage people to save more, not spend more. Imagine I tell you, you put money in the $100 in the bank, and in 5 years' time, I'll give you back $95.
Yeah, I bet you would, because people are thinking, shit, it is so... If they have to go to negative interest rates, it's so screwed up and worried. I can't spend anything. I need to save. Well, it hasn't caused bank runs over in Europe. It's just because it's too much of a pain in the ass. That's the thing. I can't imagine it would be much different here.
That's what negative interest rates mean. And in response to that, we're seeing in some European countries and in Japan, there's some evidence of this as well, that people say, well, because I'm going to get less from the bank in 3 or 4 years' time, I've got to save more. So negative interest rates can become contractionary from that perspective. So reduced supply of credit, and maybe some people save a bit more versus the benefit of the exchange rate. I think in the current situation, I don't think that the cost benefit justifies negative interest rates. It's interesting that, can I just make one more observation? Since we've had the pandemic, no central bank that's had positive interest rates has gone negative, and no central bank with negative interest rates has gone more negative. I think that tells you that the consensus amongst the central banks is that really there's not that much to be gained from.
Really? Mr. Nice Guy, they're storing bullion. Or they're storing physical cash.
Yeah, from doing that. And perhaps the costs are greater than the benefits. If that consensus were to change, then, as I said, we haven't ruled it out. I think it's extraordinarily unlikely.
Let me take you up on two responses there. First of all, on the impairment of the financial sector, it seems to me you're effectively there putting bank profits ahead of jobs in an environment in which our...
I don't sound as stuck up as this guy, do I, when I'm talking? You hear me? I mean, he looks like he's got a ruler up his ass. Sorry, I can't help it.
major banks have been unusually profitable, both compared to Australian corporates and compared to their international counterparts. That seems a mistaken call. Secondly, your contention that encourages saving rather than spending seems at odds with your evidence given to this committee last time, in which you said that lower interest rates boost spending on aggregate. One could tell some kind of a behavioural story as to why that changes at zero. But the bank so far has not attempted to do so. And your public statements on this haven't made clear as to what the direction...
Well, each to his own, Royce, but, you know, I'm sure it'd be a bit painful. And then you got to wash the ruler, don't you?
Direction of the effect suddenly switches when you go negative.
Yeah, well, it's an emerging area of research, and the
well, no, you know, I like listening to Philip more than the other guys. It's working good. It's working good. They're doing it on purpose.
At least when I talk to my peers in with negative interest rates, some of them say, look, in their countries, there's evidence that something changes at negative interest rates, that the mindset switches. That when you tell people they're going to get less out of from their bank than they put in, that worries them, and they start to save more.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It'd be counterintuitive, wouldn't it? You wouldn't think so, but they're just shit scared. They're worried. They're worried. Because how many people wouldn't put their money in another way to, to make something else, or put it in gold or silver? I mean, you could just buy some precious metals and chuck them in a safe.
So I think there is something different about going into negative territory. The evidence is still emerging because the experience with this is fairly limited. But I think it's plausible, and people are worried about it, and we're not seeing people go more negative as a result. And I'd take issue with the contention that I'm putting bank profits before jobs. What I want to see is the credit supply process work effectively.
I sound stuck up any time I mention avocado. And Michael, about the listing on the stock exchange, I don't think that was ever actually used. I think that was a way to give Australian, to allow Australian access to corporate funds over there, to issue bonds directly to that market. I don't think it was ever actually used.
Because we need banks that are profitable and that are willing to supply credit, and that the credit supply markets are not distorted. My concern, at least at the moment, is that negative interest rates would make credit supply more difficult, and that would hurt jobs. So it's not about bank profits, it's really about jobs. And my current view is that negative interest rates wouldn't help jobs, and arguably could make it worse. If that judgment changes, then we'll move.
Let me ask you about the term funding facility. It was aimed principally at increasing lending to small businesses, but Reserve Bank statistics released show that over the year to June, small business lending fell, while lending to large businesses grew by 8%. Does that suggest the term funding facility was too small to provide sufficient support to small businesses?
No, that's not a conclusion I would draw at all. The demand for credit by small businesses at the moment is quite weak. Now, what business at the moment wants to go and borrow to expand?
Large businesses?
I'm sorry.
Well, how many small businesses are the ones that are copying it everywhere? We're the ones that are getting shut down everywhere. That we're hitting it. And look at all the small businesses in Victoria. Are they going to borrow money to... I mean, that's the scary thing. Are people going to borrow money to keep their businesses going when they could be locked down at any instant? There needs to be some assurances from the state governments that they're just going to ride it out, or that, maybe here's an idea. Let's, the states, that he's pushing for fiscal stimulus. He's pushing for government spending, state job creation. How about the states looked at investing in maybe additional emergency facilities, upgrading some of those regional hospitals to have additional capacity so that they could manage opening up the economy more and potentially having more cases that needed emergency help. I mean, there you go. There you're getting the fiscal stimulus. There you're opening up the economy. Has that ever been put on the table? no, not bloody camps. Just, I mean, here in Queensland, we've got hospitals in all these little tiny towns in the middle of nowhere that are just, run down aged cares that could be refurbished. You could upgrade them. What do you think? Why not? They could do that. That'd solve all the problems.
I didn't catch you.
Is it really plausible that the demand for credit by small businesses during this pandemic is smaller than the demand for credit by large ones? I'm talking about the underlying rather than the loan applications.
Playtime. They already have that, mate. They already have that around aged care. Rachel's worked on some of them. They've got because if you've got dementia, some of them will wander, and Rachel's grandmother was doing that, so they've got fences all around it. I think the systems in aged care here in Australia, my understanding was that they didn't even have adequate procedures in place to ensure that there was sufficient PPE for people, and then it'd be spread all around. But the thing is, in these aged cares, they even when a gastro goes through, you start losing people. If they were reporting every day on the deaths in aged care, but it sounds like it was a systematic failure of the system.
What we saw at the beginning of the crisis was many large banks draw on their credit lines because they wanted liquidity. They borrowed money from the bank and put that in their deposit account so they could be sure that they would have enough money at hand to pay their bills. So credit to large businesses did increase very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic, and now some of that credit is being paid back.
I think they should report all the cures every day, Yogi Bear. Not all the deaths. I think all the people that are recovering. Maybe I should do that. I should try and find that and report on it every day. You'll get at me about being a bloody doomer, something new and exciting, and I'll try and find it every day. Do a little report on how many people have recovered. That would be uplifting and encouraging, because that's what they should be reporting on, shouldn't they? And it's always so, oh no, I mean, I understand why the news is portraying everything in a particular way, because there's a bias to the negative. I see it on my YouTube, guys. I'll do something which is a negative article and it'll get 2,000-3,000 views. I'll do a nice happy piece. Nice guys calling me a doomer. A nice happy piece, some good news, and none of you bastards watch it. None of you bastards watch it. Oh, no, that's good. We don't want to watch that. Blah, blah, blah. No. So I'll try and find it. We'll have a look. Maybe it'll be on John Hopkins.
I'm not, clearly credit supply to small business is an issue. It's one that's been with us for years and years. At the moment, our sense from talking to the banks and even to some of the small business associations that not many businesses want to borrow. They don't want to borrow because they're so uncertain about the future. They're not investing. They're really in preservation mode.
Because there's so many uncertainties from the state. There's sovereign risk now. There's state risk.
The term funding facility is making a difference. It makes it, that makes sure that the banks have plenty of liquidity to provide the credit if they need the liquidity. I think that's working, but it's really the demand side that's the problem.
Guys, the problem with all these people who are claiming cures, I mean, it may just be that they've recovered over it and it's a coincidence that they've used it, so they have to try and, that's it. The fatality rate's only about 1-2%. If you're my age, you're very low risk. You look at the figures. You got that doctor, they're pushing. It's the solution. Could just be a coincidence with the number of people that she's treated as such a low risk. That how many of them are in aged care homes? None if they're walking to her for a doctor's visit. Just look at the stats here in Australia, guys.
Demand's a function of price. And have you considered alternatives like lowering the interest rate on the term funding facility below zero? The ECB does this with their targeted longer-term refinancing operations. Have you looked at options like that for extending the flow of credit?
No, I'm talking about playtime. The state intervening on the ability for you to actually carry on business. when I'm referring to sovereign risk, it'd be like the state shutting us all down and locking us down, or like some dodgy African or Southeast Asian country just usurping or taking your property. That's what I'm referring to sovereign risk.
To small businesses?
It's the same kind of issue about negative interest rates. I think it would be curious for us to lend to banks at a negative interest rate when the government interest rate was positive. And so that would be, if we move to negative interest rates, that would be an option. But I don't think the lack of growth in small business credit is because the interest rate's too high. They're as low as they've ever been. What we hear is that in the particular environment we're in at the moment, the demand for credit is weak. So
you got to. I mean, the governor's making perfect sense here. People are worried; they're not going to borrow. What is he a doctor of? Economics. Hang on, I'll bring him up. Let's look at his. What did he do his PhD on? I'm not sure. I can't find it. I'll have to find it. We'll look at it. He'll be on something.
It's not surprising. Why would you go and borrow at the moment when there's so much uncertainty about the future? So,
well, large businesses are, small businesses aren't, and so that points to me towards a pricing problem. Clearly, that's not the read you take out of the data.
A pricing problem? Oh, yeah, he's ALP. Of course, he doesn't. He should know. Lots of small business people are tradies, aren't there? Or then again, they all flip, don't they? Wouldn't you think? A pricing problem? No, it's bloody doctor and printing money. It's anyway. I mean, come on. Is that what you think when you hear small businesses aren't borrowing? Are you thinking it's a pricing problem, guys in the chat?
The yield curve control has been fairly effective in lowering medium-term interest rates. What would lead you to extend yield curve control to a longer maturity, such as lowering 5-year yields to 0.25%?
Is Andrew Lee a MMT supporter, is he? Because the governor isn't.
Well, we chose 3 years for a couple of reasons. One is that the 3-year bond rate influences corporate and bank borrowing rates. Quite a few companies that borrow in the bond market will do it for around 3 years, and banks raise a lot of funding at around the 3-year mark. So by lowering the 3-year bond rate, we kind of lower the funding costs right across the country. So that's the primary consideration. The second consideration was linked to the forward guidance point. I feel reasonably confident in saying that I think the cash rate is going to be at its current level for 3 years. The forecast that we talked about earlier on would suggest that the cash rate's not going to increase for 3 years, and having a 3-year target is consistent with that. Am I confident the cash rate's going to be where it is for 5 years? Maybe, maybe not. I would certainly hope not. So I think it's going to be a target for the risk-free government yield curve. It should be broadly consistent with your expectations for your own policy instrument. And it's possible that the cash rate is where it is for 5 years. I hope it isn't, but it's possible. So if I thought that I had a very high degree of confidence that the cash rate was going to be here for 5 years, then there'd be a stronger argument to target a 5-year yield. But let's start with the 3 and see where that goes and how the economy progresses.
But suppose your goal was to get inflation within the target band by the end of your term. Wouldn't extending yield curve control to a longer maturity help achieve that?
It may or may not. I mean, I don't know that we would get much more traction at the moment from having the 5-year yield curve, was it 10 or 15 basis points lower than where it currently is. But if we're going to have a target for a 5-year yield, I think it needs to be consistent with our expectations for the cash rate.
I'm interested in your...
Sorry?
Your purchases of state bonds. When I look at the share of state bond purchases and compare them to the population distribution, the thing that jumps out at me is that you're buying a smaller share of New South Wales and Victorian state bonds than their proportionate share of the population.
Oh, the governor doesn't have confidence in Victoria or New South Wales. We heard it here first.
What explains why you're buying relatively fewer New South Wales and Victorian state bonds?
Yep, thank you. Can I ask Chris Kent, who's on the phone line, not on the video, to answer that, because he heads that area that's in charge of the bond buying program. So, Chris, are you on the line?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Essentially, the whole point of this program to purchase these bonds was to counter the bond market dysfunction that we were seeing, both in the federal government and the semi-government markets. So it was to counter market dysfunction rather than fund the states in particular. So what made sense for us is to sort of calibrate it according to the stock of bonds outstanding as the more relevant metric. And certainly investors typically don't hold bonds in proportion to something like gross state product. They're more likely to follow something which is weighted according to the outstanding stock of bonds. So the shares that we ended up allocating to the different states, New South Wales and Victoria, was around a 45% of our buying program, and that was in accordance with the value of bonds outstanding, and a bit less than something like the share of those states in, output of the economy.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mr. Nice Guy saying because the market is buying Victorian and New South Wales bonds. So they need to prop up Queensland and WA. Nah, mate, no. It's because Queensland and WA better. Yeah. I'm sure of it.
Governor, I want to take you to the human toll of the downturn. You've stated recently that the scarring impact on Australian workers will be larger than anticipated. Can you talk a bit about what Reserve Bank research reveals about the impact, particularly on young workers, of extended periods of joblessness over the course of their career?
Well, it's not just our research, it's research by many others that say that if you enter the labour market in a time when there's high unemployment, that affects your income and your job prospects for years. If you don't get onto that first rung of the job ladder, then it's harder to climb up the job ladder in later years and your income suffers. I think the research, not just from us, but by others, is that there are mental health and physical health issues as well from long periods of unemployment, which can reduce people's employability and success in the labour market.
And that increases the soy consumption and the prevalence of people gluing themselves to roads and protesting over crazy things, and it just snowballs from there. I finished that off for you, Governor. And then you got all these crazy protests, which are apparently allowed. Well, you can't go to another house and play computer games because a protest of 10,000 people in the street that's fine. That's fine. It doesn't spread a virus. But playing computer games, that does. And then I'll put a plug in for those of you that haven't watched my Twitch channel. You should sign up because I play computer games with my children. FTL.
So this is why I've said a number of times already through this hearing that the priority needs to be get people into jobs, because that's.
You're talking to the wrong people, mate. You're talking to the wrong people. These people will stop us getting jobs.
Where the scarring comes from in terms of both people's economic performance, but also their success as a member of society. If you have a long period of unemployment, there are a lot of issues that come with that.
World of Tank Platoon. Oh boy, I've got it. I haven't played in ages. Maybe I should. I'm pretty. I watch Jingles and Klaus Kellerman. I don't play that much. I'm crap. I don't spend money.
You knew that this was going to be deep and prolonged recession, and that we were going to be at the zero lower bound for an extended period. Would that change how you thought about unconventional monetary policy? At the moment you're being relatively conservative compared to many of your central bank peers. Would you be inclined to be more aggressive, and if so, on which of the three areas we've discussed this morning?
I mean, we are prepared.
Royce, he's on $1 million, mate. We're not joking when we're saying he's on $1 million. He's on $1 million a year. Unless you're talking about someone else.
To do more if we think doing more would get extra traction. Judgment at the moment is that given the nature of the problems the country faces, us moving interest rates by 5 or 10 basis points isn't really going to make a material difference. There's not going to be kind of much traction from that. The problems are elsewhere. If we get to the point where our judgment, where the board's judgment is that we would get traction from further adjustments in policy, then we're prepared to do that.
So the question is, these politicians that are asking these questions, are they concerned about the risk of unconventional monetary policy, or are they hoping for unconventional monetary policy? And we've got an ALP, pretty lifelong lawyer and academic here, Andrew Lee. What do you think, guys?
In a speech that I gave a few weeks ago, he said it's certainly possible to cut the interest rates that we've currently set at 25 basis points down to 10. As I said before, we haven't ruled out negative rates, although it's extraordinarily unlikely. It's possible that we could complement the 3-year yield curve target with a program of bond buying further out the yield curve, not targeting the 5-year raise you suggest, but buying kind of 5 and 10-year bonds to try and get those yields down a bit more. So it's possible we could do that. And if we get to the point where we think that would get traction and make a difference to jobs and economic performance, then we're prepared to do it. But I think right at the moment, we're not at that point. It's not the cost and availability of credit that's...
What's worrying me here, guys, is that Phil, our governor, is making more sense than our politicians. Oh, shit. G'day, Crunchy. Thanks for joining. You follow TIK on YouTube? No, I don't know who that is. I'll have to have a look. For YouTube, I mainly follow, like... Mighty Jingles and Worth a Buy, just content creators of games and stuff, different things, other than what I create. To be honest,
it's causing a weak economic activity. It's the lack of confidence. It's the shutdowns. It's the pandemic. Hopefully we get to a point where people are again focusing on the cost and availability of credit. They want to invest and expand, and it might be at that point that further monetary measures do gain traction. If that's our judgment.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to ask you about what's coming back, a couple of issues through your liaison program. What are you hearing through your liaison program about the potential for a wave of insolvencies when insolvency laws change at the end of September? And secondly, what is your liaison program telling you about landlords refusing to negotiate with small businesses on rent reduction, given that the federal government has left reduction to be negotiated on an individual business-by-business basis?
This will be interesting to see.
Yep. Maybe I'll ask Lucy to come on the landlord, but on the wave of insolvencies, it's certainly a concern for many businesses that once this temporary restriction is removed, that they will have to be put into insolvency. So there's an argument for kind of extending the special provisions, as we talked about before, that currently exist. So I think it's an issue that's going to need to be managed. My hope is that to the extent that businesses are going to fail, and there will be failures, that this can be smoothed out over time. There's no interest for kind of large numbers of firms to go bankrupt at the same time. The banks are very conscious of this, as we talked about in terms of the mortgage customers. they're also complex in terms of small businesses. So it's a process that's managed, but we do need to face the reality that some businesses will go bankrupt. That's what happens when you have the biggest downturn in 100 years. It's the unfortunate and harsh reality and the human cost of. I know many small businesses around the country are very worried.
Yeah, I mean, he's right there, but he hasn't been to any specifics. This is why I'm so worried about the home builder and the construction sector. Cake 85. I don't know what you mean with second channel for guide videos. I don't really have any. I had a Heise Education for tutorials and different things, but I don't really maintain that very often. But no, I've got a few. If you can see them all on my YouTube page, all the other ones, it's Heise Games and that type of stuff.
Read about it. So it's important that the support measures remain in place, and that as they're gradually wound down, that's a staggered process rather than going over a cliff.
Oh, that's Heise Architecture, mate.
The banks are aware of that. The government's aware of that. It's difficult. I know it's very difficult, but I think it's manageable. Lucy, on the rent issue, I haven't been on top of discussions there. You may be a bit closer to it than I am.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. We're not hearing a pattern of firms that
should I skip over it?
We have heard from some landlords that some firms that are actually doing okay, some of their tenants that are actually doing okay have nonetheless been asking for rent reductions. So we do hear both sides of the story in our liaison program. Certainly some landlords have experienced have seen very large declines in rental income, particularly in the retail sector, because they have been offering rental reductions, and some rental contracts already have sort of a bit of an automatic factor to allow for turnover anyway. We haven't been hearing a consistent set of stories that people who are businesses that are genuinely in distress are being refused, but I'm sure there will be cases of that, or where there is a difference of opinion about just how distressed or just how much of a decline in revenue that tenant has experienced. I might just add to that, we have also seen a lot of reductions.
Flying's asking if any of these people have run a business. No, it doesn't look like it. Andrew Lee doesn't look like it. Tim doesn't look like it. So both the Labour and Liberal guys are like lawyers or career academics and then go straight into politics. I guess that's the path. And you got to have like some high-pitched nasally voice too, eh?
In rent for households. And in terms of the insolvencies, yes, we do hear from our liaison contacts that they're worried that there will be many insolvencies, particularly in construction, retail and hospitality, but we haven't seen it yet. And that's partly because of the rules and partly because of the many other measures to tide people over during this difficult period. And in fact, the insolvency practitioners in our liaison program are sort of not exactly twiddling their thumbs, but they are not seeing the flow of business that they are expecting either from businesses or households.
Yeah, I think that's got to do with the pause in the rules rather than the factors. Governor, I wanted to conclude with a final question about what I think must rank as the worst market decision in Reserve Bank history, the decision in 1997 to sell 167 tonnes of gold when the world gold price was $400 an ounce.
This will be good. Yeah, Flying, ask me a question, mate.
The gold price is now about 5 times as high, around $2,000 an ounce. So had Australia held on to that gold, it'd be worth about $9 billion more now than it was back then. Do you acknowledge that, in retrospect, that was a lousy decision? And what will guide your decision in future as to the Reserve Bank's to buy or sell gold?
Before we get in the gold one, I'll answer Flying Wombat's questions. Why are houses built on the ground? Well, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to just whack a slab on the ground, and you can control the movement, and just whack up the studs. That's it. Compared to a raised house. You can get some of the older ones. You can still build them. But you look at the price they churn them out for some of these speckies. It's cheaper, particularly if it's off the simple slab, simple oil, simple soil. They don't care about airflow, any of that. You got air conditioning, mate. Air conditioning. They make you seal your houses up.
Perhaps I can ask Guy to answer that, if that's okay.
I mean, what your price calculations are completely correct, Andrew. I suppose a couple of points I'd make is the proceeds from that sale generated returns subsequently. So you're correct in terms of if you sold it now, it would have been at a higher price. But in the meantime, that has allowed us to pay from those proceeds. We could invested them in US Treasuries, which earn a rate of return, unlike gold, which earns a 0 rate of return. And so we earned interest income in the intervening 20-odd years.
I thought they rent out the gold over in London. Don't they do that?
It also has allowed us to pay higher dividends to the government. So one way you could think about it in both of this result of the proceeds of the sale, but also the interest income we've earned on those alternative assets that we held. So you could think about this, that the government was able, that the dividends we paid to the government allowed them to do whatever they were going to do without having to borrow at a rate of around 5 or 6%. So I leave the compounding of that to you, but when you do that calculus, then indeed the decision is not quite so dramatic as the way you just framed it.
So do I take that no Reserve Bank takes draws from?
Sorry, I can't quite hear, Andrew.
Do I take it that there is no lessons that the Reserve Bank has drawn from that episode then?
No lessons the Reserve Bank has drawn from that episode. Good night, Steve. Thanks for joining us, mate.
I mean, the idea is always to sell an asset at its highest price. This is indeed a good thing to try and aim for. I think trying to predict the future of gold price, and maybe a more sensible decision would have been to turn around and then take all those proceeds and invest them in Apple shares. And we possibly would have even earned a higher rate of return. But I suppose my point there is the future is indeed uncertain, particularly about future asset price movements. And hindsight is always the greatest investor. That is one lesson that one can always draw from such calculations.
Perhaps I could make one final point. The Reserve Bank is not an investment bank. We don't hold a portfolio of assets to try and kind of make the highest return, and we're not speculating on the prices of assets. We're holding these assets in the national interest. And the judgment we made back in the 1990s that was holding large stocks of gold in our vaults, probably not in the national interest. We're better off converting those gold holdings to foreign currency, because we need foreign currency for policy purposes, occasionally intervening in the foreign exchange market in the national interest. Not very often, but sometimes we want the capability to do that. And generating a flow of income to the government, which holding US Treasuries, as Guy said, has done. So, from maximising the value of our assets, if that was our objective, I accept the criticism. But from a public policy perspective, I think it was the right decision.
All right, thanks, Chair. Other questions if there's time later.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chair. And I take it you purchased gold in 1997 and you have held on to it dutifully because you think it is the right strategy thereafter. And just for Shane Wright at the Sydney Morning Herald, I need to clarify that they were dishes in the drying rack. Now I'll hand over to the member for Fairfax, Ted O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Governor, and to your team. We all love hindsight. And if you do find that crystal ball, if you could please share it with me, and we'll both be very happy for the rest of our lives, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will.
Maybe just if I can start by following up on something raised by the Chair and Deputy Chair, and that's around insolvencies. And I take your point, wisely put, about the need to manage the process and that business failures are inevitable. We don't want zombie businesses roaming the countryside any longer than they need. My question, therefore, goes more to whether or not you're of the view that we should be transitioning over whatever time it is back to the insolvency regime.
The crystal ball is Peter Schiff.
Or whether, in fact, we need a different regime. And I ask the question knowing that some in the industry believe that Australia has harsher insolvency laws compared to elsewhere.
So let's look up good old Teddy here. What do you reckon? Business experience? Lawyer? Which party? Let me know in the comments. And if you know him, don't you know? Don't. What do you think, guys? LMP? Truck driver ALP? These guys are mad. Going off grid, yep. Environmentalist Labour. Okay, Liberal. Liberal National State. 20 years. Experience in business. Commencing his career in the family business, Defiance Mills. There you go. During his teenage years and young adulthood, he worked for Defiance from the shop floor as a trainee baker, and he ultimately progressed through to senior manager in Australia throughout Asia. So we got one with business experience, guys. Finally.
I can't really answer that question very effectively because it would be beyond my area of expertise about insolvency law. The current suspension's clearly helping us, and I think it's there's an argument to extend that while we're in this.
Oh, shit. You hear that little one there? Extending it. Oh, Rachel's going to be pissed. And she'll be really pissed. Another extension until we get the house done.
A particular unique circumstance. If it is the case that the insolvency law is kind of inflexible and harsh, then I think it's worth looking at. It must be as a matter of principle. It's linked to my other longer-term concern that the economy is becoming less dynamic. And it'd be interesting to explore, and I haven't done this, what role
she's going to bed flying
are playing in that we're becoming less dynamic. The rate of new firm creation and firm exit is low. I worry, and I've spoken about this on other occasions, that we're becoming less dynamic, and maybe the way the insolvency laws play out is part of that.
Well, you can see in our averaged hours of work, it's gone down. You know, you see economic complexity, it's gone down.
But I'm not an expert enough to specifically answer your question, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Am I right, though, in taking it that the RBA's estimate of both economic growth and unemployment assumes that
like this, Royce?
The current relaxations do end the end of
September. I've run out
now. I think that must be right, because our general approach is to take current laws and regulations as given.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then if I can move to some international issues, reflecting on the GFC, I know there was a lot of analysis post-GFC about why Australia did well. And frequently people point to the fact that the government started with a very good set of accounts, so they had room to move, a very strong, stable financial banking system. And thirdly, people often talk about the demand that came from China, that enormous amount of stimulus out of the PRC, and that created an insatiable demand for Australian products, resources in particular. If it's looking that China, and it is looking that they're not going down a similar path, they're being more cautious with their monetary stimulus, what impact do you see that having on our ability to recover? Appreciate the fact that iron ore is looking really strong at the moment in terms of price. But if China is not going to be the stimulus that it was in the GFC, what impact do you see that
No, I haven't flying.
On the Australian economy?
I'll have to look.
Well, you're right that in the GFC, kind of the China boom, the strong balance sheets that we had in Australia and the ability to deliver a big fiscal and monetary response and the fact that our banking system was in a really good position. They all helped us get through the GFC better than most other countries. At the moment, China, again, is doing better than most other countries. First,
it's asking what message would I send myself to last year? Probably buy silver. I was just starting to get into that, you know? Oh, yeah, that's it. Probably, no, further back. I'd go back, you know, when I was at uni, buy Bitcoin, start mining Bitcoin. That's what I tell myself. Sell it when it hits 18 grand.
It had a contraction, obviously, in the first quarter, but in the second quarter, it bounced back, and the high frequency flow of data out of China in the last couple of months has, on the whole, surprised on the upside. There seems to be more strength in the Chinese economy than many people have expected. We're seeing the effect of that, as you say, in iron ore prices, which are very high, and the prices of many of the base metals have also risen over the past couple of months, partly due to strong China demand. We're seeing actually elsewhere in North Asia, with the countries that have managed to contain the virus, their economies are picking up. So there's a kind of almost a virtuous circle as you get in control of the virus, and economic activity can return to normal, and there's extra investment and trade as well. So that's working reasonably well. You're right, the Chinese authorities are not stimulating to the same extent they did in the GFC. I think they learnt their lesson, but they are stimulating. There's increased spending on infrastructure, which is positive, and they've set a higher target for growth in credit than last year's target. It's not the super growth in credit we saw in the GFC, but they're allowing more credit extension in the economy. That's stimulatory, and they're spending on infrastructure. And that's helping us now, as is the recovery in some of North Asian countries in Taiwan and South Korea. But we're not going to get the huge hit we got from China. But once again, the growth in China is helping us.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And what about foreign direct investment, which has obviously taken a hit anyway globally? Can I just get your comments on what the international flows might be looking like in the RBA's view for Australia, whether or not COVID hitting other countries, probably particularly emerging nations, whether or not that provides an opportunity for Australia to be effectively a safe haven in relative terms, but no doubt probably having an absolute decline in inbound FDI. I wouldn't mind just getting your commentary on any of that.
Well, at the moment, net foreign investment in Australia has turned around because we're running a current account surplus for the first time in many decades. The counterpart of a current account surplus is the capital flows. So that's turned around for the first time in many decades. Your question, though, is really about foreign direct investment.
That's right.
And that is weak at the moment because investment in physical capital is weak. And we understand why it's weak. No, firms don't want to invest at the moment at the peak of the COVID pandemic. Going forward, whether overseas firms want to undertake foreign direct investment in Australia will come back to how our economy performs. It'll come back to the opportunities we have, our workforce, our skills, our tax system, the ability to extract our natural resources. So they're the things that are going to drive foreign direct investment in Australia. If we have high levels of investment in Australia, we'll see high levels of foreign direct investment. So we've got to get the economy back running again, and domestic firms want to invest. But investment's very, very weak at the moment. I think it's going to stay weak for a while. But if we can get the settings right and investment comes back, I think we'll see foreigners find Australia a very attractive place to deploy their capital and to build new physical assets in Australia. At the moment, there's continuing strong demand for Australian government securities. And foreign investors find Australia a very well-run place, strong institutions, strong balance sheets, and so there's strong demand for Australian government securities, which is keeping interest rates down. But the key is to make Australia an attractive place for firms to invest, both domestic firms and foreign firms. And it comes back to some of the issues we were discussing before.
Yeah, and one of the other things discussed before, you're talking about your confidence in the stability of the banks, and you did mention some of the risks around household debt, which is particularly high. So it seems to me like there's households are somewhat caught between economic needs. On one hand, they're so indebted that they don't want to expose themselves further, but on the other hand, we want them to spend. And so, which is it? Which do you think the priority should be? Do we need the Australian households to be spending right now, or to be paying down their debt?
Well,
This will be interesting. What do you reckon, guys? What do you think in the comments? We've only got a few minutes left of before we go to a break, and I think we'll finish that for tonight and do the rest tomorrow night.
I want them to do both, and I think they can do both.
Yeah, you afterpay your debt. Use afterpay to pay off your debt. There we go.
You know, the saving rate's kind of positive. In fact, at the moment, the saving rate is as high as it's ever been because household income has held up, largely due to the government transfers, and spending has been depressed by the restrictions and the uncertainty that people feel. So the saving rate has gone up, and that's helping improving people's balance sheets. So we can, if our income growth is strong enough, we can both spend and pay down our debt. I'm always circling back to income growth, and that comes back to investment and jobs.
Yeah.
So we can do both, and at the moment, households are using a lot of the extra income they've got through the government support programs to improve their balance sheets. We hear from the banks that when the government makes the payments to people, that in a lot of cases it goes off their mortgage or goes into their offset account. They pay down their credit card because credit card debt's in declining.
Mr. Nice Guy, you can find a link to it on Hansard, on the Australian Parliament. Every session, all the videos are up there. I recorded this when it came out today. It was finished at 3 p.m. today.
People are paying back that because they've got the income through the government support programs, and they're trying to get their balance sheets in a better shape, which is good. So most of the debt that the household sector have and hasn't come because we've consumed too much. Most of the debt we have is because we borrowed it to buy high-priced houses and apartments.
That's right.
Yes. Which is another issue, but consumption is not being financed by debt in Australia, and hasn't been for a long period of time, by and large.
Because we've got everything has to go into our fucking houses.
So I'll probably make this my concluding question, Chair. And to you, Governor, going back to where my little session started, which was that crystal ball. If you did have a crystal ball, what would be the one uncertainty we currently face that you'd love an answer to?
Well, I have kind of two big uncertainties. One is kind of obvious, the pandemic. I mean, because the economy will not return to normal until we get on top of the pandemic. Even if we don't have restrictions, people are nervous. And when you're nervous, you don't spend and firms don't invest. We don't get the foreign direct investment you were talking about. So the biggest uncertainty is control of the pandemic.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for your time.
Once we get through that, I think the next big uncertainty is the commitment of the global economies to an open rules-based trade system, And I'm sensing a retreating commitment in some countries, which I find incredibly worrying. Australia has benefited from an open rules-based system more than perhaps any other country in the world. It's the source of much of our prosperity. So if there's a retreat from that, I think we'll pay a big price. The world needs to come together to solve some really big problems. I did list there the pandemic, climate change, the taxation of the global economy, dealing with some debt problems in some very poor countries. So these are issues that are first order that need a global solution. And if we're retreating from globalisation, the ability to come together, then the global economy will be weaker and Australia will be less prosperous. So that worries me in the medium term. Once we get through the pandemic, we'll have to deal with making sure that the countries of the world can effectively come together to make sure our economies are strong, deal with climate change and deal with the taxation issues and with some really chronic problems in some very poor countries, which will ultimately could come back to hurt us all.
Thanks very much, Governor. Thank you, Chair.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Ted, Mr. O'Brien. We're now just going to take a quick 10-minute break from 11:05 to 11:15.
Okay, thank you.
Well, everyone, what do you think? I think that's how long we've been going now tonight. 2.5 hours. So I think we'll call it for tonight. And I think finish this off tomorrow. If you're interested to see the rest of this Economic Standing Committee, what do you all think? Any surprises there? You know, it's good. I might pull out a few interesting bits. Find particularly the governor's stance on MMT. We're in trouble. Yogi Bear now feels perfectly confident in the economy and houses. Fantastic. You know. You know, it's not midnight yet. I still got time. Debt and regret. Buy gold and silver. You know. Maybe a global new world order solution. Maybe some type of reset. You know, and maybe the World Economic Forum has it. You know. But yeah, nah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bloody tired now. And I will see you tomorrow. Have a good weekend. And if you're here in Brisbane, enjoy. I hope you've had a good public holiday. You know, had a day off. I mean, I guess for all that you Victorians, it's like a public holiday every day, isn't it, sadly? The World Economic Forum. Yeah, I mean, that's where I picked it up from now. Now everyone's talking about it and you sound like a nutter. You know, you sound like a nutter. All good, guys. Well, any other questions? I got a little, what is it? Little controller now, so I can play my my SNES on the computer. So it's all good fun. You know. So all good. I'm gonna relax and then head to bed, and you know. Have a good night, guys. This lasted a lot longer than I thought. I thought, you know, we'll watch his talk. You know, Brett, they're wiping out the middle class. Feels like it, doesn't it? Really feels like it. You know, all good. Spending to save the economy, that's what they're trying to do. Ethereum. Isn't Ethereum getting pumped because of all the DeFi stuff, which has just been pushed up because people are trying to, you know, create bubbles forming? I don't understand DeFi, you know, because what, you put up crypto to get more crypto. Be better if you could put up a house or a real asset to get crypto. You know, I guess that's the next step. Meg's at best to stand up and sound like a nutter before our entire country falls. Yeah. Mr. Nice Guy, crypto's a joke. All big government social democracy does. Yeah, good night, Brizzy. Well, actually, where is everyone from? We've still got 100 people watching. Where are you all from? Let us know in the chats. Be interesting to see, because with the stats, about 80% of my viewers are Australian. 80% are Australian. Then Americans about 4%. Then NZ's like 6%. Perth, Sydney. Fight Club reference. Perth. China wants Brisbane. Jingalpa, Moreton Shire, not Brisbane, Sunny Coast, Tamworth, New South Wales, Melbourne. So we've got a few lock-ins. They're still letting you use the internet past date. Actually, do you want to see, what is it? Do you want to see the Karen email I got, or I'll do that in another video? I'll do that in another stream, guys. I'll do that in another stream. Some of the Karen emails. Sudan, Toowoomba, New York studying in Sydney, Ipswich, Queensland Sunny Coast, Mid-North New South Wales, Brisbane. If you're in Springfield, I'm close. North Shore and Sydney. Okay. Melbourne prison sector. Next tilt. Did you hear about that, Rolf? How in America, the Democrats are turning off water and utilities to people that have parties. You know? Are you working Rockley? Okay. That's where our butcher is, mate. Rockley, the meat market's there, you know? In California, yeah. I mean, that's just insane. That's just insane. Melbourne's becoming a dictatorship. Yep, it is. And people want it. Looking forward to the Karen email. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. Maybe I'll start up with it. Make every party a protest, yeah. Yes, yeah. Put BLM out the front. Then they won't arrest you. I think a lot of people will get out of Melbourne. You know, sell up and buy a nice place up north. But honestly, I would see the exact same thing happening here in Queensland. I would see exactly the same thing happening here in Queensland with our Premier. You know, and it's kind of a shame it hasn't, because we've got an election coming up. Would have been interesting to see. You know, see an election swing it. Well, yeah, where will they go? Where's it really to go, you know? Poland? Go to bed, you look wrecked, Heise. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I probably should. Oh, shit, it's 12. Okay. Videos may be a bit late tomorrow, guys. They may be a bit late. But then again, I don't need that much sleep. We normally get up at 5 or 6:30 every day. I've been eating lots of good food. Russia. What did the Premier do yesterday flying? Hanson for PM, you reckon? Well, she's a senator, so she couldn't be. I think One Nation seems to... Well, I think they're a more centrist party, to be honest, seeing by their policies. They're not right-wing, that's for sure. They're not right-wing. They've got some left policies. I think they're pretty centrist, to be honest. I mean, look at Latham has joined them. You know? If anything, they're centre-left. Adams for PM, eh? At least it'll be entertaining. I reckon his Twitter could compete with Trump's for entertainment value. Ryan saying opportunities. Yeah, you're right. What happened to Anning? Oh, I think he just shot himself in the foot. I would be shocked if his party comes back. They put a bill in that that can't meet it. What do you mean? What are you saying? A bill? They can't talk about policies that are under ACC investigation. Oh, really? Really? Okay. He's not getting a government pension, is he? It's an interesting one. I met a lady who was from Sudan at the pool, because I've been taking the kids to swimming lessons. And I was having a chat to her, and it was interesting because I told her I had 5 kids, and she was shocked. You know, white Australian with 5 kids, because she had none. She was coming over here, and I said, well, wouldn't you have, you know, Sudan, they have a lot of kids, wouldn't you be getting the pressure from the parents? You know, but, you know, cultures adapt, guys. Cultures adapt. So I thought it was quite surprising. Because, yeah, they were getting the pressure from the parents. Well, guys, I'm going to bed. I'm bloody tired. I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great night. And thanks for staying up and watching this. And we'll watch the next bit tomorrow. I'm just going to save this so I don't lose it. Take care. Where's my outro? We'll do the outro, hey? Why not?